and Celebration of the Sound Through. Those were published in 1980 and 1982 when Sobin was in his mid to late 40s. They were published by the Montemora Foundation as a supplement to a magazine that they were running. They're in truly kind of Sobinian fashion, very humble objects. They don't have an image on the cover. They're off-white. They are kind of bordered in red. They look very much like a French book, actually. They're very understated. Gustaf's next 3 books would be published by New Directions. He came to know James Laughlin through the intervention of Charles Tomlinson and to some extent Elliot Weinberger. And they in turn had been put on to Gustaf Sobin's work by John Berger, whom you know as the art critic who was living in southern France. I think he still does. And he was an early, maybe the earliest true admirer of Gustaf's work. And so Gustaf went to work looking at landscapes in southern France for a pound project, a cantos project that Laughlin wanted to put together. It never worked, but Gustaf would describe having the Baedeker in one hand and Pound's cantos in the other and wandering around looking for the quite exact spots where things took place in those poems. The Earth as Air was the first of those volumes and probably his breakthrough book. I think most people agree. Voyaging Portraits in 1988 and Breath's Burials in 1995. And you can hear in Breath's Burials part of that exhaustion I was talking about. And then he moved to Talisman House and published his final 3 books with them, excluding the selected poems that he also published with Talisman. Those titles are Towards the Blanched Alphabets, which is the book where I discovered Gustaf Sobin. That was published in 1998. I was a latecomer to his work. In the Name of the Neither in 2002, and The Places as Preludes in 2005. Gustaf also wrote a children's book. He wrote 4 books of fiction. He's not terribly well known for his fiction, although this photograph, I think, came from a New York Times book review of The Fly Truffler, which is his best-known novel. Gus Van Sant remaindered it and never made a film out of it. But kind of tellingly, 2 of Gustaf's novels are set in Provence, and 2 of them are set in Hollywood. And those seem in a way like the appropriate coasts because he spent a lot of his childhood on the West Coast. He was giving a swimming lesson by Esther Williams. I was going to say by Esther Sobin, but that's his daughter. So that's a weird slip. And he's also a translator of René Char. We'll hear more about that as the day goes on. And he was a translator of Henri Michaud as well. A couple quick, I don't want to call them themes, but sort of predominant problems that come up in Sobin's work. One of them is margins themselves. I think it was Teddy Lopez Mills that he told in an interview that he celebrated margins. He's a marginal figure himself, and I think he was always interested in margins in both figurative and literal ways. Civilizations that got pushed to the margins, what's on the margins or the outskirts of sight, the inadvertent detail that might be the most central one after all, what's at the edges of consciousness, and so on. And so margins themselves are something that he's constantly sort of concerned with. And one of the figures who is important to Sobin early is Thomas Traherne, the metaphysical poet, himself a very marginalized figure until the 20th century. But Sobin credits him with an interest in hymns of praise. There's an Edenic sort of impulse in Traherne's work that seems very close to Gustaf's retrospective view, retrospective long view across civilization. The philosophy of Martin Heidegger was extremely important, especially to the early Gustaf Sobin. As we'll hear from some other panelists, he met Heidegger when he came to France on several occasions. Quickly, the relationship between being as such and beings as individuals was clearly crucial to him. The idea that language was ontologically central to our being on Earth. The notion of trying to find or inhabit one's authenticity in the face of fear and anxiety in the they, that is everyone else that's not oneself. The sort of drive against forgetting. Of course, Heidegger was very concerned with the way we've forgotten certain tenets of our philosophy. And there's very much in Sobin's work that's about commemorating and digging back up what's been occluded. Also, the encroachment of technology was a very real problem for Sobin. He was a self-admitted Luddite. At some point, he got a fax machine, which was a marvel to all those people who knew him. He would not be using email even now if he were alive, I think. And DuPont tried to buy up part of his, Monsieur DuPont of the chemical company tried to buy up land and succeeded in buying up land next to his house in southern France. And they came to a kind of accord about not buying Gustaf out of his own property, but I think it was a kind of symbol to Gustaf about how technology was always trying to make its way into the landscape. And then leading into the ideas of Heraclitus a little bit, Heidegger's notion of the fourfold, that is where the earth, the sky, the mortals, and the gods would come together in some kind of relationship. In terms of Heraclitus' philosophy, Sobin was interested in the way that the world never revealed itself, but would send out signs or signals, so that the poet was a kind of hermeneutical interpreter of the world around him, that the world liked to hide. This conversation between eternity and ephemerality, in the way that one might see eternity in a very ephemeral object, or look at something that was purported to be eternal and see that it could be destroyed in just a couple of minutes with a stroke of a pen or a button. And especially Heraclitus' idea that everything elemental in the world transforms into something else, that fire becomes water, becomes air, and that one of them is death to the other, and that the whole world is a complex, a kind of organic matrix of dynamics playing themselves out. I'll stop the thematic role just quickly because I'm almost out of time, and just say something about Gustaf Sobin's form, because we'll be talking more about themes. In reviewing Sobin, Fred Muratori said that it's like reading all one long poem. It's like tracking the oscillations of a wave. And I think there's something to that. There's a real sense that Gustaf's work is a kind of passacaglia. It's a passage from beginning to end. Certainly as you proofread a 700-page collected poems, you can have the impression that it's one poem kind of continuing on. A slightly more nuanced version maybe came from William Corbett, who said in an equally reductive way, but interestingly, either Sobin wrote short, sort of clotted poems that tracked vertically down the page in a sort of haiku-like fashion, or he wrote long, sprawling poems. And I think that gets to this idea that many of Sobin's poems are chiseled, they are small, they're organically grown or trained as a sort of vine. They're filmic in their vertical orientation. They would begin with an observation and move to some kind of perception. He couldn't write the second line until he'd had the first line perfect. He couldn't write the third line until the second line was perfect. So it was a very kind of organic process, vertically oriented, and only staggered by the broken words, a way of kind of unseating the language and finding the morphemes and the phonemes inside an individual word. Until 1979, when a second formal impulse really crops in. And he starts writing a poem called Carnet, and they're eventually going to be called transparent itineraries. And like Robert Duncan's passages, they're like a super serial poem. That is a sequence that transcends the books they're in and keep running across the books. And here, rather than growing something organically, Gustaf would do something quite mechanical and bricolage a poem out of what was left over at the end of the year. All the kind of cigarette butt ends of poems he couldn't do anything with. He would literally cut them out and lay them out on the bed and the floor and move them around to make a kind of kaleidoscopic poem out of it. There's an ecological imperative to that. It was a way of commemorating the end of a year, but because he would do it at the beginning of the year, in January, it was also a way of taking an ending and turning it into a resolution for the year that was to come. And then those poems faded into a third kind of impulse in his work, which is what I'll end with and pass the mic on, and that is a lot of the late poems, or some of the late poems, became very essayistic in orientation. And in collaboration with actual essays he was writing about anthropology and archaeology in southern France, he had a long poem about sarcophagi that had endnotes to it. And he became much more concerned in these poems, less with the ephemeralities of an abstract world or of thinking through, and he got really down into the nitty-gritty of specific civilizations and their monetary policy and what they did with their sarcophagi, and tracking them in an elegiac fashion. But these poems become like mini essays, and they're very interesting and intriguing to read alongside the essays that he published in Luminous Debris, in Aura, and in Ladder of Shadows. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Now you all have to read all this book, to understand all that. There's not a particularly thematic development about the presentations here, so we're just going to go down the table. There will be relationships, but Teddy Lopez Mills, please.